Well, good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be with all of you here on this Easter Vigil. In a particular way, I want to welcome our individuals who are preparing to be baptized tonight, those who are preparing to be received fully into the Catholic Church, and the Catholics who are getting ready to receive confirmation and First Communion. It's the night you've been waiting for almost a year now. So I'm glad to have you all here, along with all the family and friends who've come to celebrate this most special night. For those who have been with us over the course of the Triduum, you know that I have been looking at the strange topic of failure in Christianity, of how the idea of failure fits into our faith, and trying to sort of be real and address questions, difficult questions, of our own moral and spiritual failures, and the darkness and the suffering that we must often face without trying to give easy answers or sort of overly pious solutions. And what led me to start preaching about this topic, or to choose the topic for tonight, is the fact that it's so easy, or realizing it's so easy, when we as Christians face certain questions or issues, to just throw out a certain answer and say, this is obviously the right thing to say. Because this is what we believe, this is what we're always taught. And not face the fact that sometimes our experience doesn't really line up, at least in our minds, or coincide, it appears, with what we believe. And so what I've been trying to do is show how indeed they do coincide, but so often we've got to be able to look at it from a different perspective. The challenge is not to say, well, our experience doesn't line up with our faith, so obviously our faith is wrong. Instead, to challenge ourselves to look at it in a new way. And so we come to Easter. This is our great feast, what we've been waiting for over the course of these past 3 days. So the day we celebrate the fact, or the belief, that we believe that 2,000 years ago, as an historical fact, God made man named Jesus, died, and rose from the dead. This is not a myth. This is not something concocted by the apostles. This is reality. And it changed the lives of the apostles, and they spread this message, and even were willing to die for it. That Christ rose from the dead and is still alive today. It's the anchor of our faith. It's why we believe what we believe. It's why we're here today. It's why we go to Mass every Sunday. Without a belief in this radical, seemingly crazy fact of the resurrection of Jesus, our whole entire faith is in vain. It's the last chapter. It seems to sort of close everything up we've been talking about for the past couple of days. The apparent failure of Jesus in forming his apostles. The failure in the darkness of the cross. We realize today that Jesus didn't fail. It looked like he did. In the eyes of the world, it looked like he failed. But really, he didn't. He rose from the dead, and as we believe, conquered sin and death. Conquered our human failure, and so now Christ chooses, particularly through the gift of baptism, to share that victory with us. We are blessed to be able to share in the victory of the resurrection. And so we know all the phrases. We've heard some at Mass today, and we're going to hear them over the course of the next 40 days. Christ in his death and resurrection has renewed creation. The world is new. The universe is new. We will know the power of the resurrection in our lives if we believe in Jesus and share in his baptism. And we as Christians, because of the resurrection of Jesus, are called to put away the old things and live the newness of life in Jesus. We hear these things all the time, and they're so beautiful for us to proclaim, particularly on this night. But the truth is, if we're going to be honest, so often our experience doesn't live up to this. They're nice things to say. It sounds great. But when we look at the world around us, When we look at our own lives, does it appear that everything has changed? Does it appear that earth has been renewed? Does it appear that lives have been changed? We turn on the news, we read the internet, we look at television. Sin still proliferates. It's everywhere. Even in the church. There's so much hatred and violence and death and blood. And the spread of atheism, the lack of belief, the hatred towards God seems to be growing exponentially, at least in the West. We know, and the argument would be, that sin is vanquished, death is vanquished, but we won't see it played out until the last day. We won't see it until the last judgment, when we share in the victory fully of Jesus. But man, shouldn't we see some fruits now? Shouldn't we see at least a little bit of change now? Where is the change? Where's the power of Christ's resurrection? Where's the renewed creation? Where is that strength to reject sin and to live that newness of life that Jesus promised? I sound like the glass is half empty. Sorry to do that on Easter, but we've got to face the facts. And what's even worse, this is especially true, at least in the minds of a lot of people, when we think of the sacrament of baptism. In the baptismal sacrament, which we're going to celebrate tonight, we go down into the water, which is the death of Jesus. And we rise up to new life, sharing in the resurrection. And through the grace of God, God the Father, Son, and Spirit come to dwell in our souls. We become tabernacles of the Trinity. This is what our catechumens are celebrating tonight. This is why we're here. And it's joyful. But just as we realize that the Eucharist doesn't produce miracle effects in us, baptism is not some sort of miracle bath that you're going to rise from and ready to slaughter all your spiritual enemies. Baptism isn't some cure-all. You're not going to become Thor rising from the waters in that movie Age of Ultron. That scene really didn't make any sense, but I guess it's a good analogy. You're going to still struggle. You're going to still sin. You're going to have to go to confession pretty soon. And some of you may actually end up leaving the faith. Baptism doesn't mean that all of a sudden I'm baptized and I'm going to be a faithful believer all my life. We can reject the faith. So now it seems we're back at the beginning. We're here to celebrate the new life, but yet it appears that even the celebration of Christ's victory is tainted with failure. Tainted with failure. And so there's a temptation, I guess, to lose hope. Say, Father, you talk so much about this failure, and it sounds nice in the way you've turned it around, but ultimately, if indeed the world hasn't changed, if sin still proliferates, shouldn't we just lose hope? We've all experienced this. Shouldn't we be tempted to just throw in the towel, to go home? Why don't we see the power of the resurrection in our world and our lives? And it causes us, and it could cause us, to lose our faith and trust in God and His plan. And the worst is despair can set in. And I can tell you, in my time as a priest, I've seen a lot of people, good people, struggle with this reality. Realizing they can't get rid of sin in their lives as hard as they try, and as much as they live the baptismal promises, they don't see their lives change that much, and they don't see the world change that much. And so it's so easy to fall away. But the worst thing, though, tied to the potential of losing hope, and I say it's worse in a way that I'm going to try to help you understand, is the fact that if we give in to despair, if we think that all of Christ's work is a failure, that we're failures, that we really can't live this life as Christ wants us to, if we give up hope, we also give up love. And that's the worst thing, because love is the most important. Over the course of the past 3 days, I've been quoting Father Jacques Philippe, so I figured I'd do the same thing today. And a very beautiful quote where he connects hope to love, and showing why the loss of hope, which leads to the loss of love, is such a terrible tragedy. He says, lacking hope, we really don't believe God can make us happy. And so we construct our happiness out of covetousness and lust, out of things of the flesh, not out of things of the Spirit. We don't wait to find the fullness of our existence in God. And so we shape an artificial identity grounded in pride. Not humility, trusting the Lord, but founded in ourselves, in our pride. Or else the most common condition amongst people of goodwill, it's all of us here, we would like to love and be generous and loving and giving ourselves. But we are held back by fears, hesitations, and worries. Somehow we think that it's all not going to work out, that God's not in control, that we're going to be failures. A lack of trust in what God's grace can do in our lives and what we can do with His help leads to a shrinkage of the heart, a lessening of charity. But as Saint Therese of Lisieux said, trust leads to love. That's the great tragedy. If we give up hope, if we don't see any sense in this Christian mystery, if we can't believe in the resurrection, then we give up. And what happens is we turn to created realities for our own meaning, to ease the pain, to give us some hope. Or we allow that fear and anxiety to take over. We begin trusting more in ourselves. And all of this kills our ability to give of ourselves, to love, to serve. So I can make the analogy in marriage. When trouble comes to a marriage, when there's a trial, when the bond seems to fail, maybe the trust is betrayed through a lie or through adultery, what happens is we begin to lose hope that this marriage is going to succeed. And then what happens is when we allow that despair to come in, what do we also see go? Love. We don't want to serve anymore. We don't want to give ourselves anymore. Resentment sets in. Hatred, and the heart shrinks. And this loss of love, particularly in our relationship to God, our ability to love others around us, is the most deadly. Because if we lose the ability to love and to give of ourselves, then we begin resenting God and potentially doubting His love for us. And there's the key. There's the heart of what we are talking about. If God doesn't love us, then the Triduum makes no sense. Jesus didn't have to do everything He did. He did it because He loved us. He freely wanted to give Himself to us. And so what is the Eucharist? We celebrated on Thursday. It's Christ the bridegroom's gift of His body and blood out of love to His church. The cross is the willingness of our God to die for us in order to redeem us and give Himself to us. And of course the resurrection, so beautifully summed up in that passage from the Old Testament, from the Song of Songs. Love is stronger than death. It's the Lord's love for us, the infinite love for us that enabled Him to conquer death. Which means, as dark as it may seem, we do not have to fear death any longer. But the question then is, how could God love us? How could this be true if He lets us fall into sin? How could God really love us if He allows us to suffer and experience darkness? How could God love us if He allows us to fail? What kind of father does that? But here's the mystery. Once again, to grasp it, we're going to have to draw from our own experience. And to see indeed our experience is in accord with our belief about the resurrection. I want you to think about the times in your life that you have experienced the greatest love. That you've felt the most loved, the most cherished, the most lovable. I think a lot of people are going to say, well, that's the time that I was with my spouse. Maybe my day of marriage, the night of the honeymoon, something beautiful, something romantic. And while that's a beautiful thing, Most of us are going to be honest, that's not the time that we remember, or those types of times that we remember the most. Instead, we feel the most loved, the most cherished, often in times that are radically different. We felt the most loved, the most cherished in the worst and darkest of times. So think of the time that you fell into a grave sin, something you were tremendously ashamed of, something that may have been in the past that you can't let go of, even though you've been forgiven, or something in the present that causes you such great shame. But yet that sin is revealed. Someone finds out about it, and you know what? They don't judge you. They don't reject you. They don't kick you to the curb. And in fact, they love you even more. And through that love, through that persevering love, when you feel that you are completely unlovable, you begin to see yourself once more as lovable through their eyes, through the love that they've shown to you. And you're able to forgive yourself and see some value. Or maybe a time when you're the most down and out, when you're friendless, lonely, feeling alienated, being bullied, turmoil in our lives, feeling rejected. Things seem to be falling apart. But yet, someone comes in and breaks the loneliness. That one person who's willing to stick it out with you when everything seems to be falling apart. The one who's willing to give you some comfort through that darkness. And their love eases the pain. And although things don't get better right away, no miracle happens, you're able to persevere because of that person or persons who show you love. And third and finally, when our health begins to break down, we experience sickness, suffering, or even when we're facing death, or maybe someone we love is facing death. And there's someone there to sit with us in our hospital bed, to be with us, to provide the things we need, to care for us or our family, to love us and to be there and be God's presence. It helps to calm our fears. It helps to give us life. It's a pure and attached love that doesn't want anything in return, but is there to serve in the time that you need it the most. And there's the power of the resurrection. The power of a love that is stronger than death. The power of a resurrection alive in darkness. But in order to experience that, the power of love that is so much more powerful than any type of romantic love we can imagine, you've got to experience the sin. We've got to experience the darkness, the weakness, and the failure. Because if we don't, you can never know the power of that love. A love that redeems. A love that gives worth. A love that makes us feel lovable again. A love that gives us great hope. It's encountering the risen Christ, not necessarily as the apostles did, but we encounter the risen Christ through his body. Through the love of others. He mediates that power. He mediates that love through others to dispel the darkness. But if we've never experienced failure, we've never experienced the weakness and the poverty, then you're never going to know that love. If you never know darkness, you'll never know the power of the resurrection, of the light of Jesus. Mother Teresa, such a great example of this, who faced despair and destruction and sin and death every day. The reason she began ministering to the poor is because Jesus said, "Come be my light," and bring that light into the dark hovels of the poor. What is that light? It's the light we're celebrating tonight, the light of the resurrection, the light of hope. Mother was supposed to be the risen Christ to the people in the darkness so they could experience the Lord's redeeming love. And even though we may not be Mother Teresa, we're still called to share it with others. And when it's brought to us, we're called to recognize it. So the resurrection is not a failure. The Lord's power, his redeeming love, his new life is there, but we often don't recognize it. We're waiting for the miracle. We're waiting for the superhero Jesus. We're waiting for the power. The power is only shown in the darkness, the weakness, and the failure. But once we've experienced that, a large way or a small way, the love that is stronger than death, the love that is stronger than sin and darkness, it changes us. We experience redemption, salvation, resurrection, and as a result, we want to share it with others. So when we see others whom we love fail and fall into sin, we want to bring them that light and bring them into forgiveness and experience the weakness of Christ, particularly in the Eucharist, that Christ is present with them there, shining his light on them. When others, their worlds fall apart, their success diminishes, they have to encounter the failure and the abandonment of the cross, we're able to sit there in the darkness with them and give them hope, give them something to rely upon. Or when they begin to lose hope and that despair sets in and all they can see is their own failure, we are called to be the light of the resurrection in their lives. And so it is in this, in our ability to experience and even more share the light of the risen Christ with others, that the light of the risen Lord Jesus will shine in our own darkness, in the darkness of the world, and bring true success out of failure. Amen.